All right, here we go, page 54. Can chimps learn human language? For many years, scientists tried to teach chimps to make the same sound as humans do. No one ever had success. Chimps' vocal cords make it impossible for them to speak. Then, in 1966, two researchers tried something different. They began teaching American Sign Language to a 10-month-old chimp named Washoe. Washoe? I'm going to call him Washoe. In time, Washoe learned to make the signs for about 130 words. According to her teachers, Washoe could also create a word when she didn't know the sign for something. On seeing a swan, Washoe made the signs for both water and bird. Did this mean Washoe understood words? It certainly seemed so. However, to many scientists, this did not count as truly learning a language. Language involves making sentences, using grammar, and having conversations. None of the chimps could do anything like this. Page 56. In many ways, the chimps behaved like humans. Though unable to speak, they had their own means of communicating. Jane learned to tell what their different grunts, pants, and screams meant. For example, chimps greeted one another with soft, panting grunts. A certain loud scream was a cry for help. Chimps, like humans, expressed feelings through gestures. They hugged and kissed one another. They bowed to show respect. They patted friends on the back for comfort. They also shook their fists or threw rocks to show anger. To Jane, naming the chimps just felt right. Did Jane have a favorite chimp? Yes. Jane called him David Graybeard because of the silvery hair around his chin. In one of her books, she wrote, "David Graybeard has the most beautiful eyes of them all, large and lustrous, set wide apart. They somehow expressed his whole personality." David Graybeard had a calm nature and was not afraid of Jane. He was the first chimp who seemed to accept her. One day, Jane held out a piece of fruit to David Graybeard. He came up to her, took the fruit, and then held her hand in his. 58-59. What a special moment that was for Jane. David Graybeard taught Jane Goodall a lot about chimpanzees. For a long time, scientists believed that chimpanzees were herbivores. Herbivores are animals that eat only fruits and vegetables. They do not eat meat. But one day, Jane saw David Graybeard and several other chimpanzees in the upper branches of a tree. They were grouped around something. The something turned out to be a dead piglet. 60-61. David Graybeard handed out pieces of meat to the others. He also let them bite off meat themselves. For 3 hours the chimps fed on the piglet. What Jane watched proved that chimps are omnivores. They eat meat as well as lots of food from plants. This was interesting news, but a couple of weeks later, Jane came upon David Graybeard doing something even more amazing. It was a day of heavy rains. Jane was tired and dripping wet. Through her binoculars, she spotted David Graybeard. He was squatting down by a nest of termites. Termites are insects that chimps like to eat. Termite nests are like big mounds with a hole at the top. David Graybeard was poking a long blade of grass into the hole of the nest to fish out termites. David was using the blade of grass as a tool. It did a great job of supplying David Graybeard with tasty termites. Why was this so amazing? Up until 1960, scientists believed that humans were the only animals able to make tools. Making tools may not sound like such a big deal, but think about it. 62. A dog digs a hole with its front paws. It does not know how to make a shovel to dig a deeper hole more easily. Also, its paws are not able to hold a shovel. An animal needs a big, smart brain to make tools. An animal also needs hands with thumbs in order to grasp tools. Chimps have big brains. They also have thumbs. Still, scientists did not think that chimps knew how to make tools. But Jane watched David Graybeard do exactly that. Once David Graybeard was gone, Jane went over to get a closer look at the grass tools. Jane tried pushing one into the nest herself. Sure enough, she could feel termites grab hold of the grass. When she took out the blade of grass, the termites were there, kicking their legs about. 64-65. In her book, Reason for Hope, Jane wrote that it was hard for me to believe what I had seen. It had long been thought that we were the only creatures on earth that used and made tools. What she saw proved that was not so. Another time, Jane came upon David Graybeard and a big, strong chimp named Goliath. They were fishing for termites together. They kept a supply of extra grass tools in case any broke. Sometimes they picked up twigs and stripped off any leaves before using them. Again, this may not sound astounding at first, but the chimps were making changes to the twigs so they worked better as tools. Chimps also used chewed clumps of leaves as sponges to soak up drinking water, and whole leaves made good washcloths for cleaning themselves. Louis Leakey was thrilled when Jane sent news of David Graybeard's fishing trips. Leakey knew he'd been right about sending Jane Goodall to Gombe. He spread the word of what she was learning. It did not take long for the National Geographic Society to give Jane enough money to stay at Gombe for another year. It was the best gift in the world. How alike are chimps and humans? It may surprise you to know this, but a human being is more like a chimp than a mouse is like a rat. Why are humans and chimps so alike? The reason is that they come from a common ancestor, an ape-like creature who lived on Earth somewhere between 4 and 8 million years ago. Even a quick look at humans and chimps show many similarities. Human and chimps' faces are alike. They show the emotions they feel, like happiness, sadness, and fear. Both humans and chimps have hands with thumbs. What can't be seen is the brain inside the skull of a chimp or human. Both have a large brain for their body size. That's what makes them smart animals. The DNA of humans and chimps is almost exactly the same. DNA determines the makeup of any animal. There's just a little more than 1% difference between the two species. Yet that little difference counts for a lot. It accounts for why chimps don't understand how to grow food and why they are unable to speak or make art or music. And although chimps do make simple tools, they can't make machines or think the same kind of hard, deep thoughts as humans. And here is an odd fact. Unlike humans, chimps do not cry tears. Chapter 5. Hugo arrives. National Geographic magazine wanted the world to know about Jane Goodall and the chimps of Gombe. The magazine hoped to publish an article as soon as possible, an article with photographs. In August 1963, Jane's first article appeared in the magazine. It was called My Life Among Wild Chimpanzees. Jane could not take the photographs for the magazine herself. It was hard enough following the chimps around with binoculars and taking notes. But she also was not eager for a photographer to come join her. Why? She was afraid that it would disrupt her work. The chimps were finally allowing her in their midst. She was able to get much closer to them. They were sometimes only yards away. In time, David Graybeard began coming to the camp to visit. He'd take handfuls of bananas from Jane. Soon, other chimps came too. If a stranger suddenly appeared on the scene, the chimps were sure to be fearful and hide from Jane again. All the trust she had built would be destroyed. Jane's suggestion was for her sister, Judy, to join her in Gombe. Judy would take photos. Jane and Judy look a lot alike. Jane figured that the chimps might accept her sister. Having Judy's company was very welcome. The two sisters would go off together into the forest. 70-71. Jane continued watching the chimps while Judy took photos. The trouble was, Judy's photos weren't good enough for magazines. Once again, Louis Leakey found a way to help Jane. He arranged for a young photographer who worked for National Geographic to go to Gombe. His name was Hugo van Leeuwenhoek. Hugo was interested in everything about the chimps, and Jane was wrong about how the chimps would react to Hugo. They didn't mind having him around. He was able to catch chimps patrolling their home range. 72. He took pictures of two chimps in a fight to become the group leader. His photos were wonderful. In 1963, National Geographic magazine ran an article about Jane and the chimps. It was the first of many. Louis Leakey was very happy that such a famous magazine recognized the importance of Jane's work. 74-75. However, Louis also wanted the scientific world to accept Jane as an expert on chimpanzees. The fact that Jane didn't have a college degree worked against her. So, Louis Leakey helped to get Jane admitted to Cambridge University in England. Cambridge is one of the finest universities in the world. Even though she had never gone to college, Jane was allowed to study for an advanced degree. Cambridge decided that her work with the chimps counted as a college degree. Of course, studying at Cambridge meant being gone for a part of the year from Africa. Every day away was hard for Jane, but by 1965, Jane completed all the work for her doctorate. She was now Dr. Jane Goodall. Hugo van Leeuwenhoek. Hugo van Leeuwenhoek was born in Indonesia on April 10, 1937. His family were Dutch aristocrats. Hugo was a baron. Like Jane, Hugo was fascinated by the animal world from the time he was a child. He too wanted to live among wild creatures. In order to learn about them, Jane took notes on everything she saw. Hugo, however, recorded everything through photographs and film. In 1959, he traveled to Kenya to work for a Dutch film company. By 1962, he was covering Eastern Africa for the National Geographic Society. The Society's magazine sent him to Gombe. He was to photograph the group of chimps that Jane Goodall was studying. Hugo stayed on in Tanzania, continuing his life's work. Besides chimpanzees, he became interested in other creatures of the area: golden jackals, hyenas, and leopards. He won many prizes, including 8 Emmys for television shows. Hugo van Leeuwenhoek lived in Africa for more than 40 years. 30 of them he spent living in a tent. He died in 2002 and was buried in Tanzania, the land he loved so much. Chapter 6. Fame. Right away, Jane and Hugo van Leeuwenhoek became close friends. They had very different personalities. Hugo was a stiffer, more formal person than Jane was. However, they worked very well alongside each other. They were a team. Each night they talked excitedly about what they had seen the chimps doing. In time, Hugo and Jane fell in love. In London, on March 28, 1964, they were married. On top of the wedding cake was a little clay model of David Greybeard. On the walls hung pictures of David and Goliath, Flo and her daughter Fifi, and many of Jane and Hugo's other chimp friends. The National Geographic Society provided more money for Jane's work. Over time, the camp grew. Many young graduate students were to join Jane at Gombe. In 1965, buildings were erected, then covered with grass to blend in with the forest. More and more information was gathered about the chimp community. For instance, before Gombe, scientists had thought that a chimpanzee group was made up of one male and lots of females. That's not so. A group made up of many males and females. There were around 50 in the group that Jane knew.